This book has its origins in a growing sense of alarm, of frustration, and of futility. As international efforts to reduce emissions have failed repeatedly to meet their targets, even as warnings by experts about the existential dangers of climate change and the need for haste have grown, I developed a stronger and stronger sense of the comparative irrelevance of most of the issues on which I've been working in the areas of international relations and security studies. A revelatory moment came when I was researching the growing tension between the United States and China over the Chinese military occupation of reefs and sandbanks in the South China Sea. I suddenly realized that as a long-term issue, these places will be meaningless for both sides, because if nations, and China and the United States above all, fail to take action to limit climate change, by the end of this century, rising sea levels and intensified typhoons will have put the sources of these tensions underwater again. The rush of Western security establishments towards a new Cold War with China and Russia and new US threats of war with Iran provided an additional impetus to write this book. For in all the innumerable articles and essays on this subject, hardly one has mentioned the destructive effects of hostility between China and the West on international cooperation against climate change. In my approach to international relations, I have always considered myself a realist, though one strongly influenced by the Christian realist philosophy of Reinhold Niebuhr and the ethical dimensions of the works of Hans Morgenthau and George Kennan. As such, I have never believed in national power as an end in itself, but only as a path to the achievement of greater goals, including universal human ones, defense of the Western democracies against serious threats to their security, but also international peace and cooperation through a recognition of the legitimate interests and the power of other states. This book is therefore in part an appeal to my fellow realists and to sensible and patriotic policymakers all over the world, to reassess the interests of their nations, in view of the overwhelming evidence for the severe danger posed to the future of those nations by anthropogenic climate change. It is true that climate change is a new issue for realists, but then it is a new issue for everybody, historically speaking. Realists have always been chiefly concerned with state interests, and as this book will argue, the long-term interests of the world's great powers are far more threatened by climate change than they are by each other. Realists claim to be concerned with reality, not with vague dreams of a perfect future. They ground their view of reality on a sober study of the evidence, on what is, not what ought to be. Moreover, of the cardinal virtues, the most important for realists are prudence and courage. And if there was ever an issue that demands prudence in judgment and courage in action, it is climate change. If intelligent realists do not wake up to the threat of climate change today, they will have no choice but to do so tomorrow, when it may be too late to prevent catastrophic results from their nations. This book is mainly directed at audiences in the Western democracies, but this part of it should appeal equally to patriotic elites in Beijing, Moscow, and Delhi. In democracies, and especially the United States, strong public recognition by the military of the threat of climate change to the United States is of great importance because of the influence the military has over conservative audiences who are no longer willing to listen to civilian experts. As Nicholas Stern, the leading economist responsible for the British government's report on the economic consequences of climate change, has pointed out, messengers matter. Different audiences trust different types of messenger. Climate change communication, to be effective, must utilize rhetoric and frames that resonate with the values and emotions that could inspire action.